Good evening. Yeah, lighting's horrible. That's fine though. You can tell it's humid out. My hair is instantly curled. So, I had somebody ask me a very interesting question I'd never been asked before. I was talking to them about my sobriety and, being an addict and recovering. Ex-addict, as I like to say now. I think it's another subject. Anyway. The question they asked me was, how do you cope with being sober? I was a little befuddled. I'm still playing with this phone. Anyway, I was a little befuddled. I never had actually had anyone ask me that question. And so I decided to, think about that for a minute and flip it around. I've heard people who don't suffer from addiction ask me, how do you cope with being high all the time? Or drunk? Or, how do you deal with a gambling addiction or a shopping addiction or a sex addiction? Or some of the other types of addictions, certain types of codependency and this kind of stuff. But I never actually had anyone ask me how you cope with being sober. And I didn't know how to answer that at first. I thought, what an odd question. And I suppose the first part of that is it's not the best worded question. And if I, as most addicts, myself included, if I had a answer to that question 20 years ago, I wouldn't have been an addict. Because how I coped with being sober or reality or life on life's terms before was to escape it. Because that's what addiction is. And so, I answered the question as best I could, which was, it's not about necessarily coping. Of course, you want to have healthy coping mechanisms, and I have a lot of different ones. I meditate, I pray, I listen to music, go for walks in nature, I sit in my car and make videos. There's a lot of healthier coping mechanisms. Something my grandfather used to tell me all the time was anything in excess is abusive, and it's absolutely true. But the real trick isn't necessarily finding a better or healthier coping mechanism. The trick is building a life that you don't want to escape. Reaching a point with yourself through self-love, self-forgiveness, self-care, where you're no longer, where you're comfortable in your own skin. In the 12-step rooms, how do they say it? Truly knowing serenity, peace within. Most forms of addiction, are people trying to either numb some emotional whatever or escape reality. Now, the interesting part about that is, and I'm sure some of you heard this statistic or stat or fact or whatever, info, is that, your reality is 20% your environment and what happens to you, and 80% right here. It's all in the mind. And what that means is you make and create your reality, literally. Every moment of every day, every choice you make, every decision you make. In the example I've given in other videos, somebody walks up and smacks you in the face. Sure, they're responsible for the initial sting, they're responsible for the initial shock, disrespect, whatever. But it's up to you as to whether or not you're going to continue to let that bother you, and how long you're going to let it bother you, and how you even react to it, if you even do decide to react. To quote the scriptures, turn the other cheek. And that's a lot of what addiction is, or coping with being sober, is, first of all, being in a state of mind, in a state of being where you actually enjoy being sober. I personally absolutely love it. The clarity of thought. The peace, the serenity, the calmness. The not feeling like I'm in a constant state of emotional reaction or in survivor mode all the time. I actually feel like I am co-creating. So yeah, how do you cope with being sober? Well, first and foremost is, in my experience, and I'll use me as an example, before I could deal with life on life's terms, I had to learn how to deal with myself and heal. And that's not easy. Healing hurts. My experience, most of the stuff that I've had to heal entailed sitting with it, feeling it, experiencing it over and over until I had gone through every facet of perception I could in that given situation. And this is just me, this is how I am, I overthink everything, until I had run through every possible scenario, every excuse, every justification, every motivation, anything, and looked at a situation and dissected it from every angle I could possibly come up with, and even asked for some others. And once I had exhausted all of those avenues, and I found that the pain or the hurt or whatever was still there, well, then it's a matter of learning how to take your power back. It's a matter of learning how to take ownership. I did a video on accountability. And that's essentially what that is too, accountability. The thing about accountability in that word is there's a negative connotation to it, because obviously it implicitly means responsibility. Unfortunately, most people, when they hear the word responsibility, they hear blame and they hear fault. It's not a fault. It's not a blame. Take ownership. Every situation you're in, every interaction you have, you play a part. Now, of course, there are things like random car accidents. Well, I don't believe in randomness anyway. I don't believe in coincidence, but that's another video. But of course, there are situations that are beyond your immediate control in the physical. What is not beyond your control is you and how you react, and how you're going to allow something to affect you, and how much power and weight you give that thing. You know, one of the tricks to learning how to let go of the past is sometimes the past doesn't let go of you. And it can be hard. But to start with, you know, learning how to truly accept situations for what they are. Most addicts suffer a thing called terminal uniqueness. We think there's nobody else like us. Nobody else has ever suffered like us. Okay. Yeah, I suffered from it for many, many years. Trust me on that. And of course, we're all unique. Every human is unique. Excuse me. Every soul is unique that's having a human experience. Yeah. Taking ownership. Change the word accountability to ownership. It's much more empowering. The end result is still the same. You're taking your power back. You're acknowledging the part you played. You're acknowledging whether it be consciously or just subconscious programming, where you have allowed a person, place, or thing to dictate your emotional, mental, and spiritual state of being. Therefore, dictate your reality. So, to answer the question, how do I personally cope with being sober? Quite well, actually. I love it. I always did. It wasn't my inability to cope with being sober or life on life's terms that has caused me to relapse. No. Yes, there have been situations I've run into where I was extremely overwhelmed. You know, there's a saying that says you rise to the occasion. No. You rise to your training. Life will throw things at you that you are not prepared for. Those are the situations that usually comes down to you and your higher power. And I've had many of them. Have I failed? Have I made mistakes? Absolutely. I wouldn't be making these videos if I hadn't. But I'm also trying to learn from those mistakes. It's not how many times you fall, it's how many times you get back up. Remember, as of right now, in this moment, right now, today, you have a 100% survival rate. Everything life has thrown at you, you've survived. You might have come out bruised, battered, wounded, scarred. Sure. But if you made it up to this moment, right now, in this video, you have survived. You are resilient. You are strong. Probably a lot stronger than you give yourself credit for. Take ownership. Drive the wheel. Drive the car. Whatever you want to say. Yes, you're always going to have external factors to navigate. One of the things that helped me, a prayer I've said for many years now. I ask my higher power to grant me the willingness to love myself the way the universe loves me. It's quite effective. So, to finish answering the question, how do I cope with being sober? There's all kinds of ways. 100 different tools I've picked up along the way. But self-love is a big one. Self-forgiveness is another one. taking ownership of every situation I'm in, how I feel in the moment. If something upsets me or offends me or disrespects me, I try to stop and ask myself the deeper questions. Why is this upsetting me? Anger is always a secondary emotion. It's usually masking something like shame, guilt, embarrassment, one of the other fear-based. Sorry about that. One of the other fear-based emotions. That was kind of interesting. Sometimes you get shown a light in the strangest of places if you look at it right. Yeah. Faith is another big thing that keeps me going. But ultimately, love. Love of life, love of the universe, love of my higher power, love of the divine, love of self. Because I'm comfortable in my own skin and who and what I am, there's a lot out there that doesn't really rock my boat or affect me anymore. Not the way it used to, anyway. Learning how to become the observer. So, yeah, I guess, I don't know, that kind of segued, but there it is. Oh, Happy Easter.